The blue glow of the computer screen cast harsh shadows across Alexander Lee's angular features as he reviewed the quarterly reports. Outside his home office window, rain pelted against the glass, creating a rhythmic backdrop to his late-night work session. The mansion felt empty, despite Gloria being home, or at least claiming to be. His mouse hovered over the next spreadsheet when a notification slid onto his screen. Thomas Reed, his PI, had finally sent his weekly report. Alexander's jaw tightened, but his hand remained steady as he opened the message. The photos appeared one by one. One photo showed Gloria's silver Mercedes pulling into the Constellation Hotel's parking garage. Another photo showed her emerging from the elevator 40 minutes later, her black cocktail dress replaced by a red one she claimed was at the dry cleaners. The final image made his fingers curl into a fist, showing Russell Maxwell, his business partner, following her out 5 minutes later, adjusting his tie. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Lee, Maria, their housekeeper, stood in the doorway. Mrs. Lee called. She said her dinner with a guest was running late. She would not be home until later. Alexander checked his watch. It was the same time Gloria always called on Wednesdays. Thank you, Maria. You can head home for the night, he said. After Maria left, Alexander opened his safe and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. Inside, he documented everything. Gloria's changing passwords, her new gym membership at a club across town, and her sudden interest in book club meetings that never seemed to have any books involved. He added tonight's alibi to the growing list. His phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan Griffith, his corporate lawyer and oldest friend, saying, "Got your message. Free for breakfast tomorrow at that diner on 7th. Alexander typed back, 7 a.m. Bring everything you have on Russell's Singapore project. He closed his laptop and walked to the window, watching the rain transform the manicured garden into a blur of shadows. 8 years of partnership with Russell, building Lee and Maxwell Enterprises from a startup to a corporation worth billions. 8 years of trust, demolished by a hotel room keycard and a red dress. The front door opened downstairs, followed by the click of heels on marble. Gloria's laugh echoed through the house, the theatrical laugh she perfected at charity galas. Alexander remained still, listening to her movements. Purse on the console table, heels kicked off, the rustle of her coat. Alex, her voice carried up the stairs. You still working, darling? He turned, composing his features into a mask of mild interest. Just finishing up. How was dinner with Kate? Gloria appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair slightly damp from the rain. The red dress was nowhere to be seen. Oh, you know Kate. 3 glasses of wine, and suddenly she's spilling all her dating drama, she said. She walked over and kissed his cheek. Her expensive perfume mixed with a familiar cologne he had noticed on Russell during their last board meeting. You work too hard, honey. Come to bed in a bit. I need to review these reports for tomorrow's meeting. She pouted playfully. The company would collapse without you, wouldn't it? Her phone buzzed in her purse. She glanced at it, her expression flickering for a moment before she tucked it away. Don't stay up too late. After she left, Alexander returned to his desk and opened a new email to Thomas Reed. Continue surveillance. Focus on the financial angle. I want to know every restaurant bill, every hotel charge, every gift purchased, and get me everything you can on Russell's personal accounts, he wrote. He sent the email and leaned back in his chair, remembering the day he introduced Russell to Gloria at the company's 5th anniversary party. Russell had been charming and charismatic, everything Alexander knew his wife appreciated. Now he wondered if that night had been the beginning, if every laugh and touch had been laying groundwork for betrayal. The rain intensified outside, drowning out the sound of Gloria's shower running upstairs. Alexander pulled up the company's organizational chart on his screen, studying the names and connections. Russell might have Gloria, but Alexander had spent years building something far more valuable. A network of loyal employees, board members who trusted his judgment, and enough documentation of Russell's recent questionable decisions to bury him professionally. He opened his phone and scrolled through his recent calls until he found Marcy King's number. The CFO had been raising concerns about Russell's financial decisions for months. Tomorrow's breakfast with Jonathan would be the first move, but Marcy would be essential for what came next. A text notification lit up his screen. Russell, drinks tomorrow. Need to discuss the Singapore expansion. Alexander's lips curved into a cold smile as he typed back, can't tomorrow. Breakfast meeting with Jonathan. Rain check. He shut down his computer and gathered his papers, listening to Gloria's movements in their bedroom above. Let her think she was clever, that her excuses and stolen moments were going unnoticed. Alexander had learned long ago that revenge, like success, required patience, precision, and above all, the ability to see 10 moves ahead while your opponent was still playing checkers. Tomorrow, he would begin positioning his pieces, but tonight, he would go upstairs and play the role of the devoted, unsuspecting husband one last time. After all, the best victories were the ones your opponents never saw coming until it was too late. The corner cafe on 7th Street was nearly empty when Alexander claimed his usual booth in the back. Janet, the elderly waitress who had been serving him breakfast for 15 years, brought his black coffee without being asked. "The usual, Mr. Lee?" she asked. "Thanks, Janet. Make it to Jonathan's joining me," he replied. She nodded, glancing at the stack of folders he had placed on the table. "Looks like serious business today." "Always is." He offered a rare smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. Jonathan Griffith arrived 5 minutes later. His suit looked rumpled from what Alexander suspected was another late night at the office. The lawyer's briefcase bulged with documents as he slid into the booth. "You look like hell," Alexander commented, pushing a coffee cup toward his friend. "Spent all night going through Russell's Singapore files," Jonathan said. Jonathan took a long drink of coffee. "It's worse than we thought, Alex. The whole project is built on speculation and creative accounting." Janet returned with their plates. Egg white omelettes with wheat toast, a concession to their wives' ongoing health kick. Alexander waited until she was out of earshot before speaking. "Show me everything." Jonathan pulled out a series of reports, spreading them across the table between bites of toast. He's been inflating projected returns, using outdated market analysis to justify the investment. But here's where it gets interesting. Look at the subsidiary company handling the local contracts. Alexander studied the document. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Maxwell Pacific Holdings. When did he set this up? 3 months ago. Right around the time your wife started having her weekly dinner dates with Cater, Jonathan said in a neutral tone. The company is registered in Singapore, but the beneficial ownership structure is buried under layers of shell corporations. He's been funneling development fees through it, marking up costs by 30%, Jonathan continued. The board doesn't know. Not yet. But Randall Ramsey's been asking questions. You know how thorough he is with the audit committee reports. Alexander nodded slowly, remembering Randall's support when he first proposed the merger that created Lee and Maxwell Enterprises. What about Stephanie? Does Russell's wife suspect anything? She's been too focused on her foundation's annual gala. Jonathan hesitated. There's something else. My new girlfriend, Kate. Kate. Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. Gloria's friend. Started seeing her a few weeks ago. She mentioned something interesting over dinner last night. Apparently, Gloria's been asking about divorce lawyers, specifically ones who handle high net worth cases. The corners of Alexander's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. Kate thinks she's planning to leave you, Alex. She and Russell have been meeting at the Constellation Hotel every Wednesday for the past 3 months. Alexander's voice remained steady. I know. Jonathan stared at him. How long have you known? Long enough. Alexander pulled out his phone and showed Jonathan the PI's photos. I needed to be certain before making any moves. Now I am. What's your play? First, we need Marcy King's cooperation. As CFO, her concerns about the Singapore project will carry weight with the board. Alexander took a sip of coffee. Then we start quietly approaching other board members. Randall's questions about the audit were perfect timing. And Gloria? Let her think she's winning. Alexander's eyes hardened. She wants to leave. Fine. But it'll be on my terms, not hers. Janet appeared with the coffee pot. Refill, gentlemen. Please, Alexander said, waiting until she left again. How quickly can you freeze Russell's access to the corporate accounts with enough evidence of mismanagement? 24 hours, but we'd need Marcy's sign-off. Alexander checked his watch. He then said, tell her I'd like to meet for lunch at that new place near the office she's been wanting to try. He gathered the documents, his movements precise and controlled. One more thing. I need you to start divorce proceedings quietly. But don't file anything yet. Alex? Jonathan leaned forward. Are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. Alexander placed several bills on the table. Enough to cover our breakfast and leave Janet a generous tip. Russell brought this on himself. He could have had any woman in the city, but he chose my wife. Now he'll lose everything. His company, his reputation, his marriage. And Gloria. A cold smile played at his lips. She'll learn that betrayal has consequences. He stood, straightening his tie. Send me the Singapore documents. I have a board meeting at 10, and I think it's time we started asking some very public questions about our expansion strategy. Jonathan watched his friend walk out of the cafe. He remembered the quiet, ambitious young man he had met in law school. Alexander had been driven but cautious. This one moved with the calculated precision of a predator who had spotted his prey. The lawyer pulled out his phone and dialed Marcy King's number. Whatever is coming, Russell Maxwell and Gloria Edwards have no idea they'd already lost the game before it began. Marcy King's office occupied the corner of the 42nd floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. When Alexander arrived, she was already laying out documents on her conference table. I ordered lunch in, she said without looking up. Figured we'd need privacy for this conversation. Alexander studied the CFO. Her sharp features, the reading glasses perched on her nose, the methodical way she arranged the financial statements. Marcy had been with the company for 6 years, brought in specifically for her reputation as a financial watchdog. She had never trusted Russell's charm. How bad is it? He asked, taking the seat. Marcy removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. Remember when I flagged those irregularities in the Q2 reports? It goes deeper. She pushed several spreadsheets toward him. Russell's been manipulating project costs, creating ghost vendors, inflating consulting fees. The Singapore expansion is just the tip of the iceberg. A knock interrupted them as their lunch arrived on a cart. They waited until the delivery person left before continuing. Show me everything, Alexander said, unwrapping his sandwich. For the next hour, Marcy walked him through a web of financial misconduct, shell companies, backdated contracts, and suspicious wire transfers. With each revelation, Alexander's expression grew colder. The thing is, Marcy said, pulling up another document on her laptop, he's getting sloppy. Look at these expense reports. Dinner for 2 at Lucirk, charged as business development, a suite at the Constellation Hotel, billed as client meetings, every Wednesday. Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. Marcy glanced at him sharply. Yes, Alex. Is there something I should know? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from Gloria. Working late tonight. Don't wait up, accompanied by a red heart. He showed Marcy the message, then pulled up the PI's photos. Her eyes widened as she flipped through them. That scoundrel, she whispered. Alex, I'm so sorry. Don't be. You've just given me exactly what I needed. The board meeting next month. I need you to present a full audit of the Singapore project. Every inconsistency, every questionable decision. They'll hold him accountable. That's the idea. Alexander replied. His smile didn't reach his eyes. But first, I need you to meet someone. Right then, there was another knock. Jonathan entered, carrying his briefcase. Miss King, I believe you have some documents for me. The next 2 hours were spent strategizing. Marcy provided copies of everything. Jonathan took notes, and Alexander watched the city lights come on as dusk fell. One last thing, as they were wrapping up. This stays between us. Russell thinks he's untouchable. Let's keep it that way. Back in his office, Alexander found a message from Stephanie Maxwell, Russell's wife. The annual charity gala for her foundation was next weekend. Would he be attending? He typed back a quick confirmation, then called Jonathan. How much does Stephanie know about the foundation's funding? He asked. Nothing yet, Jonathan replied. Why? Because Russell's been using company donations to fund it. Jonathan finished. Alex, that foundation is Stephanie's life's work. Then maybe we should make sure she has other funding options. Alexander paused, setting up a meeting with her next week. Tell her it's about increasing our support for the foundation. After hanging up, he stood at his window, watching the city below. Somewhere out there, his wife was with his business partner, both thinking they were clever enough to get away with their betrayal. His phone buzzed again with another message from Gloria. Miss you. Having drinks with the girls. Don't work too hard. Alexander didn't bother responding. Instead, he opened his email and began drafting a message to Randall Ramsey about scheduling an emergency board meeting. The pieces were in place, the allies secured. Now it was just a matter of timing. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, him and Russell, at the company's launch, both smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. Tomorrow, he'd take it down. Tonight, it would remind him that in business, as in marriage, trust is a weapon that cuts deepest when betrayed. The city lights blurred as night fell, but Alexander remained at his window, planning his next moves. In the reflection, he saw not a betrayed husband, but a chess master positioning his pieces for a game his opponents didn't even know they were playing. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Lee and Maxwell Enterprises boardroom, casting long shadows across the mahogany table. Board members filed in amid subdued pre-meeting chatter, aware of today's agenda. Russell Maxwell's proposed expansion plan. Russell stood at the head of the table, his confidence radiating as he distributed presentation folders. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to show you will transform our company's position in the Asian market, he declared. Alexander watched from his seat, noting how Russell's custom-tailored suit couldn't hide the slight tremor in his hands. Next to Alexander, Marcy King methodically arranged her own stack of documents. Financial reports that told a very different story from Russell's glossy presentation. The Singapore project represents an unprecedented opportunity, Russell continued as he clicked through his PowerPoint slides. Our initial investment of $500 million will yield returns of approximately 30% within the first 18 months. Randall Ramsey, the silver-haired head of the audit committee, adjusted his glasses. Those are ambitious projections, Russell. What's the basis for these numbers? Market analysis and preliminary agreements with local partners, Russell replied, his smile fixed even as a bead of sweat formed at his temple. The documentation is all in your packets. Interesting. Randall opened his folder and removed a separate set of papers. Because I'm looking at the latest market reports from Singapore, and they show a 15% decline in the exact sector you're targeting. The boardroom temperature seemed to drop. Russell's smile faltered. Those reports must be outdated. Our research shows. I'd like to hear from our CFO, Alexander interjected. All heads turned toward him as he continued. Marcy, you've reviewed the financial implications. Marcy stood, her expression neutral as she connected her laptop to the projector. The screen filled with charts and figures that made several board members lean forward. My team has conducted a thorough analysis of the proposed expansion. The projected returns Mr. Maxwell presented assume a best-case scenario that contradicts current market trends. Moreover, we've identified several concerning patterns in the preliminary expenditures. Russell's face reddened. Those numbers are preliminary drafts. I can explain. Please do. Alexander interrupted smoothly. Particularly the $2.3 million in consulting fees paid to Maxwell Pacific Holdings, a company that, coincidentally, was registered in Singapore 3 months ago. Murmurs erupted in the boardroom. Russell gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. That's a standard practice for international operations. A local entity that lists you as the sole beneficiary. Randall's question cut like a knife. That's not standard practice, Russell. Russell turned to his partner, desperation creeping into his voice. You know how these deals work. Sometimes we need flexible arrangements to navigate local regulations. Alexander met his gaze coolly. Do those flexible arrangements usually include charging personal expenses to the company, like weekly bookings of the Constellation Hotel? The room fell silent. Russell's face went from red to pale. I propose we suspend the expansion plan and initiate a full audit, Randall announced. And I suggest we freeze all discretionary spending until we understand the full scope of these irregularities. I second the motion, another board member called out. Russell looked around, finding no allies among the faces he had so confidently addressed minutes earlier. This is ridiculous, Alexander. We built this company together. You can't seriously. All in favor? Alexander said steadily as hands rose around the table. Russell watched his previous confidence crumble as his empire began to slip through his fingers. Motion carried. Alexander declared, Marcy, please ensure all relevant accounts are secured by end of business today. Russell, you'll make yourself available for the audit team's questions. As the board members filed out, Russell remained rooted in place, staring at the damning figures on the screen. Alexander gathered his papers unhurriedly, feeling Russell's eyes bore into him. How long have you known? Russell's voice was barely above a whisper. Alexander paused at the door, understanding that betrayal comes in many forms. Russell's face drained of color as he met Alexander's steady gaze. Before Russell could respond, Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from Gloria. Lunch today. Miss you. Alexander remarked, You should answer that, noting how Russell's hand instinctively moved toward his own phone. It might be important, he added. He left Russell in the boardroom, surrounded by the wreckage of his ambitions. In the elevator, Alexander sent a brief message to Jonathan. First piece has fallen. Proceed with Phase 2. Alexander's home office had become his sanctuary in recent weeks, a command center from which he orchestrated the gradual dismantling of Russell Maxwell's world. Evening light cast long shadows across his desk as he reviewed the latest audit reports. The soft click of heels on hardwood announced Gloria's arrival before she appeared in his doorway, dressed in an outfit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. You've been impossible to reach all day, she said. Alexander didn't look up from his papers. The board meeting ran long. Russell's expansion plan didn't go as smoothly as he expected. Gloria's carefully manicured fingers tensed around her phone. Oh, that's surprising. He seemed so confident about it. Confidence isn't always backed by competence, she remarked. Alexander finally looked up, noticing a slight smudge of her freshly reapplied lipstick. How was your day? Fine. Just lunch with Kate, then some shopping, she replied, shifting her weight. A tell she developed when lying. You've been working so much lately. I barely see you anymore. The Singapore situation requires attention. He watched her carefully. Russell's decisions have put the company in a difficult position. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face flickering with concern. I should let you work. Will you be up soon? Don't wait up, Alexander replied. After she left, Alexander opened his laptop and clicked through the surveillance photos from that afternoon. They showed Gloria and Russell at their usual table at La Bernardine, her hand covering his as their heads drew close in urgent whispers. The photos had arrived with a note from his PI. Maxwell looked agitated. Meeting lasted 47 minutes. His phone rang. Jonathan Griffith. The charity gala is this weekend, his lawyer reminded him. Stephanie Hopkins has confirmed your attendance. Perfect. And Gloria. Kate convinced her to come shopping for a new dress tomorrow. She'll make sure Gloria chooses something memorable, Jonathan added. The weekend arrived with perfect weather that event planners dream about. The Hopkins Foundation's annual gala transformed the Metropolitan Museum's rooftop garden into a glittering showcase of New York's elite. Alexander arrived fashionably late, noting with satisfaction how Russell and Gloria carefully maintained their distance, stealing glances when they thought no one was watching. Stephanie Hopkins approached, radiant in midnight blue. "Alexander, I'm so glad you could make it. I wouldn't miss it," she said. He kissed her cheek, aware of Russell watching from across the garden. "Your foundation's work is remarkable," he said. "I've been reviewing the impact reports. You're too kind. Though I admit, I'm a bit worried about next year's funding." Russell's been oddly evasive about the company's usual contribution. "Has he?" she asked. Alexander guided her to a quiet corner. "Actually, I've been meaning to discuss that with you. Your educational initiatives particularly interest me." As they talked, he positioned them within earshot of where Gloria stood with Kate, pretending not to notice Russell's increasingly desperate attempts to network with board members. "Your work is impressive," Alexander said, raising his voice slightly. "It would be a shame if anything threatened its funding." Stephanie's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "Let's just say it's worth examining the foundation's financial structure. Perhaps over lunch next week, I may have some suggestions for ensuring its long-term stability," he explained. Later, as the party wound down, Alexander watched Gloria and Russell share a brief, tense conversation by the elevators. Their careful distance, the way Gloria twisted her clutch, the slight shake of Russell's head, everything spoke of growing panic. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcy. "Audit team found something big. Emergency board meeting called for Monday." Alexander smiled as he sipped his champagne, watching his wife and business partner realize their carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. The trap was nearly ready to spring, but timing, as always, was everything. Monday morning arrived with steady rain turning Manhattan into a maze of black umbrellas and grinding traffic. Alexander sat in his office, watching water streak down the windows as audit reports filled his inbox. A knock at his door revealed Jonathan, looking grimmer than usual. Russell's been trying to access restricted accounts all morning. 3 attempts to wire funds to Singapore. Desperate men make desperate choices. Alexander turned from the window. "What's his financial position?" "Bad and getting worse. He's leveraged everything on this expansion," Jonathan said, shaking his head. "He's starting to crack." As if on cue, Russell burst into the office, his usual polish replaced by barely contained panic. "This has gone far enough, Alexander. Call off the audit." "Sit down, Russell," Alexander said firmly. "Jonathan, give us a minute." After Jonathan left, Russell paced like a caged animal. "You're destroying everything we built." "Over what?" "Some corporate disagreement." "Is that what we're calling it?" Russell asked. Alexander's voice was deadly calm. "This afternoon, the board will receive a complete report on your financial misconduct, unauthorized accounts, misappropriated funds, fictitious consultancy fees." He paused. "And personal expenses charged to the company, including several hotel rooms." Russell froze. "Alex, don't." Alexander held up a hand. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't notice my wife and my business partner stealing not just my money, but my time, my trust? It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think." Alexander opened a folder on his desk. "You've been careless, Russell. The affair made you reckless. Now you'll lose everything. Your position, your reputation, your marriage." "You can't prove anything," Russell stammered. "I already have." Alexander slid the folder across his desk. "The board meeting is at 2. I suggest you use the time until then to consider your resignation. It might save what's left of your reputation." Russell snatched up the folder, his hand shaking as he flipped through the evidence of his downfall. Without another word, he stormed out. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. By lunch, word had spread through the office that something big was happening. Alexander worked through his sandwich, reviewing his presentation for the board one final time. His phone lit up with a text from Gloria. "We need to talk. Coming to your office." Minutes later, she appeared in his doorway, her usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. "What have you done to Russell?" she demanded. "I haven't done anything to Russell," Alexander replied calmly. "His own actions have caught up with him. He's falling apart. He called me this morning, talking about leaving the country. And you're worried about your lifestyle." Alexander's question cut through her protests. "Don't worry, Gloria. You'll both get exactly what you deserve." Gloria stared at him, realization dawning. "You knew. All this time you knew about us. Did you really think you were that clever? The Wednesday night gatherings, the mysterious business meetings, you should have known better. You set us up. All those business meetings, the late nights at the office. You were orchestrating this," she threatened. "No, Gloria. You and Russell orchestrated your own downfall. I simply made sure you had enough rope to hang yourselves." He walked to the window, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. "You should head home, Gloria. Pack what matters to you. The next few days will be unpleasant." "You can't do this to us," she protested. "I can, and I have. It's done, Gloria. All of it." She opened her mouth to argue, but his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Lee, the board is assembling." "Thank you, Sarah. You should go, Gloria. Your boyfriend has an important meeting to attend," he said. Alexander walked into the boardroom at the scheduled time, followed by Marcy King and Jonathan. Russell sat alone at the far end of the table, his usual allies conspicuously absent. For the next hour, Marcy methodically presented their findings: bank statements, wire transfers, and falsified reports. The evidence mounted like a tsunami of paper, washing away Russell's last vestiges of dignity. When the final vote was called, it was unanimous. Russell Maxwell was removed from his position. His access to company resources was terminated immediately. As security arrived to escort him from the building, he turned to Alexander one last time. "You've won. Are you happy now?" he asked. Alexander straightened his tie, a gesture so normal it seemed out of place amid the wreckage of Russell's career. Happiness was never the goal, Russell. Justice was. Later that evening, Alexander sat in his home office, waiting. The house creaked with familiar sounds, heels on the stairs, her nervous energy palpable even through the closed door. His phone buzzed one final time with a message from Jonathan. "It's done. All accounts frozen. Divorce papers ready." Alexander closed his laptop, listening to the sound of his wife's approaching footsteps. The trap had closed perfectly, but there was still one final scene to play out. Rain pelted against the windows of his study as Gloria paced before his desk, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floors. Her earlier bravado had begun to crack under his unerringly calm gaze. "Why aren't you angry?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I just told you I've been with your business partner for months," she confessed. Alexander leaned back in his leather chair, studying her like a scientist observing a predictable experiment. "Tell me, Gloria, in all those months of secret meetings with Russell, did you ever wonder why it seems so easy? Why I never questioned your Wednesday night gatherings or your sudden interest in Kate's personal life?" Color drained from her face. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "I mean," he said, opening his laptop, "that Russell is about to learn an important lesson about mixing pleasure with business." He turned the screen toward her, displaying a series of documents that made her stumble back into a chair. "That's impossible," she whispered. "The board's emergency meeting concluded an hour ago. Russell's mismanagement and financial misconduct forced an emergency restructuring. A cold smile played at his lips. Your lover doesn't know it yet, but his company now belongs to me. And his wife. Gloria's perfectly manicured nails dug into the armrests. You're lying. Russell would have told me if he were losing everything, if his Singapore project were built on misappropriated funds. Alexander stood, walking to his drink cart. Would you like to see the termination papers? They're quite thorough. Termination. She gasped. You can't fire him. He built this company with you, and then he betrayed everything we built. Alexander poured himself a scotch, not offering her one. The board voted unanimously. Russell will be removed as CEO tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, Stephanie has already filed for divorce. With evidence of his financial misconduct, you'll soon lose everything, Gloria. Gloria collapsed back into the chair, her arrogant facade crumbling. Stephanie knows, she asked, her voice trembling. About the affair? Not yet, but about Russell using company funds to finance your rendezvous. About the shell companies and misappropriated assets. Oh yes, Alexander replied coolly. He took a measured sip. She's quite grateful for my help in protecting her foundation's interests. The foundation. Gloria's eyes widened as the full implications hit her. The charity gala. When you mentioned it would be a shame if anything threatened the funding, I was ensuring she understood her options. Alexander's phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan, confirming the final preparations. Just as I'm ensuring you understand yours. Gloria straightened, desperation replacing shock. Alex, please. We can work through this. I made a terrible mistake. Save your performance. He walked to the window. You should answer that, he suggested, noticing Russell's name on her phone. I imagine he has much to say about tomorrow's board announcement. Gloria's hands shook as she grabbed her phone, reading frantic messages from Russell. This will destroy him, she whispered. That was the point. Alexander replied coldly. Did you really think you could flaunt your affair in my company, spend my money on your escapades, and face no consequences? I'll fight you, she threatened weakly. Both of us will. Both of us. He laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Gloria, Russell is facing criminal charges for financial fraud. His assets are frozen, his reputation ruined, and his wife's lawyers are circling. He won't be fighting anyone except prosecutors. The rain intensified outside, matching the storm of emotions on Gloria's face. Her phone buzzed again with another desperate message from Russell. He's being escorted out of the building as we speak, Alexander informed her. Security is quite efficient when properly motivated. Gloria stood on unsteady legs, her earlier confidence replaced by naked fear. What happens now? She asked. Now, Alexander said as he returned to his desk and pulled out a thick envelope. You leave. The divorce papers are ready. Your things will be moved to storage, and your access to our accounts has already been terminated. You can't just, she began. I can, and I have. He slid the envelope across his desk. The prenuptial agreement you so carelessly signed is very clear about infidelity. You'll find the terms ungenerous. Gloria stared at the envelope, tears finally breaking through her composed facade. But Alexander saw no genuine remorse in them, only the realization that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. Why like this? She asked, her voice barely audible. You could have confronted us months ago, Alexander replied impassively. Revenge, like business, requires patience and precision. You chose Russell because you thought he was the stronger partner. I wanted you both to understand exactly how wrong you were. Her phone buzzed one final time with another message from Russell. This time it brought news that made her sink back into the chair. All color drained from her face. Alexander noted her reaction. I see he's heard from Stephanie's lawyers. Timing is everything, isn't it? The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows as Gloria realized the full magnitude of her choices. In one evening, she'd lost her marriage, her lifestyle, and the man she had risked everything to be with. And Alexander, the husband she had underestimated so catastrophically. simply watched her world burn with the same calm detachment he had maintained throughout their charade. The following morning dawned bright and merciless. Russell Maxwell's arrival at Lee and Maxwell Enterprises for the last time was captured by numerous smartphone cameras. Security guards flanked the entrance, a clear message to the disgraced executive. "I'm sorry, Mr. Maxwell," said James, the head of security, as he blocked Russell's path. "Your access has been revoked." Russell's face contorted with rage. "This is my company. I built this. Not anymore." Jonathan Griffith emerged from the lobby, flanked by two corporate attorneys. "The board's decision is final, Russell. Don't make this more embarrassing than it already is." Employees gathered at windows, watching their former executive melt down. Russell's perfectly tailored suit couldn't hide the sweat staining his collar as he jabbed a finger at Jonathan. "Where's Alexander?" Too cowardly to face me himself. "Mr. Lee is in a board meeting," Jonathan replied professionally. He then discussed the company's transition with new partners, including Mrs. Maxwell. The mention of his wife's name hit Russell like a blow. "Stephanie, what do you mean?" he demanded. "She's been instrumental in stabilizing the foundation's future," Jonathan explained. He handed Russell a thick envelope. "These are from her lawyers. Along with the divorce papers, you'll find a detailed accounting of your financial indiscretions." Russell's hands shook as he tore open the envelope. His face went from red to ashen as he read. "This is impossible. These accounts were private." "Nothing is private when you use company resources for personal gain," Jonathan stated. Checking his watch, he added, "A car is waiting to take you home. I suggest you use today to pack your office, under supervision." Inside the building, Marcy King watched from her office as Russell was escorted to collect his belongings. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Status: He's here, starting to understand what he's lost." "Good. Keep me updated," Alexander replied. Down in the lobby, Gloria's attempt at damage control met similar resistance. She had arrived in last night's clothes, mascara smeared from tears, demanding to see Alexander. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Lee," the receptionist said without sympathy. "You've been removed from the authorized visitor list." "Removed?" Gloria's voice rose, drawing attention from passing employees. "I'm his wife. Not for much longer." A familiar voice cut in. Kate stood by the security desk, her previous warmth replaced by cold satisfaction. "Gloria, don't embarrass yourself further." Gloria spun to face her former friend. "Kate, what are you doing here?" "Watching karma in action," Kate replied coolly. "Those Wednesday night covers you needed. I passed every detail to Jonathan. My partner found them quite interesting." Gloria's face drained of color as the full scope of her isolation became clear. "You were spying on me. All those times I confided in you. All those times you boasted about fooling your husband." Kate's smile was razor sharp. "About how Alexander was too focused on work to notice. I noticed more than you thought." Security approached as Gloria's voice rose to a shriek. Above, Russell watched from the conference room where he was packing his things, unable to help or even acknowledge her, without worsening his situation. Meanwhile, in the main boardroom, Alexander sat with Stephanie Hopkins Maxwell, reviewing the foundation's new funding structure. "The board has approved a 5-year commitment," he explained, sliding documents across the table. "Your educational initiatives will be fully funded, independent of any changes in company leadership." Stephanie's hands were steady as she signed. "I should have seen what Russell was doing. He fooled a lot of people," she said. Alexander's tone held no judgment. "The question is, what do you want to do now?" "Protect what I've built," she said firmly. "Russell can lose everything else, but he won't take my foundation down with him." Their meeting was interrupted by commotion from the lobby. Through the glass walls, they could see Gloria being escorted out, her dignity in shreds as she screamed accusations at anyone who would listen. Stephanie remarked dryly, like a scorned person. Alexander finished, turning back to his papers. "Now, about the new board structure. The day unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction. Russell's personal items were boxed and shipped to his soon-to-be former home. His executive parking space was reassigned. His name was removed from the company letterhead. By evening, social media buzzed with news of the power shift at Lee and Maxwell Enterprises. Business reporters speculated about the future of the Singapore project, while society columnists whispered about the twin divorces rocking Manhattan's elite. In his office, Alexander watched night fall over the city. His phone buzzed with messages. Board members pledging support, employees expressing loyalty, reporters seeking comments. One message stood out from Gloria. "I hope you're happy. You've destroyed everything." He typed back a single response. "No, Gloria. You did that yourself." 2 months passed like a cleansing storm. The newly renamed Lee International's lobby showcased a fresh logo. All traces of the Maxwell name had been erased from the building's gleaming surfaces. Employees whispered about the changes, not with fear, but with a mix of awe and respect for the precision with which Alexander had executed his takeover. In his expanded corner office, Alexander reviewed the latest quarterly reports. The numbers told a story of recovery and growth, investor confidence restored, stock prices stabilizing, and the Singapore project restructured under competent management. A knock at his door revealed Marcy King, carrying a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "Thought you might want to celebrate." The SEC just closed their investigation into Russell's activities. Criminal charges were filed for multiple counts of financial fraud. Alexander accepted a glass. "My lawyers are scrambling for a plea deal." The evidence was comprehensive. His lips curved in a slight smile. "Jonathan is thorough." "Speaking of thorough," Marcy said as she set down her glass, "Gloria's divorce was finalized this morning. Kate mentioned she's moved in with her sister in Connecticut. Running away was always her specialty." Alexander turned to the wall of windows, watching his empire's reflection shimmer against the cityscape. "Have you seen today's society pages?" he asked. Marcy pulled up an article on her tablet. "Double divorce drama. Manhattan power couples fall from grace." The photo showed Russell leaving court, aged and dodging reporters, while clutching a briefcase of legal papers. "Stephanie's foundation is thriving," she noted. "The new board appointment suits her. She earned it." Alexander's voice held genuine respect. Unlike some, she understood the value of building something real. His phone buzzed with an email from Jonathan. "Russell's remaining assets have been seized. The man who helped build Lee and Maxwell Enterprises now faces possible jail time. His reputation was in tatters, his social standing destroyed." "You planned this perfectly," Marcy remarked, echoing the whispers circulating through corporate circles. Alexander turned from the window. "Not planned. I simply made sure I was prepared for anything. In business and in life, that's all we can do." A comfortable silence fell as they watched the city lights emerge against the darkening sky. Below, workers streamed out of the building, heading home to lives untouched by the drama that had unfolded at corporate heights. "Do you regret any of it?" Marcy asked finally, as she refilled their glasses. Alexander considered the question, remembering Gloria's tear-streaked face as she packed her things, Russell's desperate attempts to salvage his reputation, and the swift execution of a plan months in the making. "We made our choices," he said finally. "I simply ensured those choices had consequences." His computer chimed with a new message. The latest quarterly projections showed Lee International's strongest performance to date. Success, it seemed, was the sweetest revenge of all. "What now?" Marcy asked. "Now," Alexander said, picking up the latest acquisition proposal his team had prepared, "we build something stronger, something that can't be compromised by weak men or unfaithful partners." The city sparkled beyond his windows, a testament to power, ambition, and the careful calculation of a man who had turned betrayal into triumph. His phone buzzed one final time, a message from Jonathan about another successful quarter, another victory in the endless game of corporate chess. Alexander smiled, knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold, but carefully invested. In the end, he hadn't just reclaimed his company. He had rebuilt it into something greater, proving that true power lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the strength to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal. The night spread its dark wings over Manhattan, but in his office high above the city, Alexander Lee sat surrounded by the fruits of his calculated patience. He had lost a wife and a business partner, but gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that in the game of love and business, the winner isn't the one who strikes first, but the one who strikes last. As he reviewed the company's latest reports, watching the evidence of his success scroll across his screen, he knew that his revenge hadn't just been about punishment. It had been about transformation. Lee International would rise stronger, its foundation no longer compromised by weak links of betrayal and deceit. The city lights twinkled beyond his office window, a constellation of possibilities stretching into the future. His phone buzzed with messages from board members, business partners, and employees, all aligned with his vision and part of the new empire he had forged from the ashes of betrayal. Alexander leaned back in his chair, a rare smile crossing his features. Sometimes, he reflected, the best revenge isn't just about destroying what was lost. It's about building something better in its place. And as the night deepened over his reformed kingdom, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one written entirely on his own terms. Epilogue. 5 years later, the Manhattan skyline had changed, with new towers reaching toward the clouds, but none stood as prominently as the gleaming headquarters of Lee International. The company's transformation from a partnership built on betrayal to a global powerhouse under Alexander Lee's sole leadership had become a case study in corporate resilience. Inside his expanded office suite on the top floor, Alexander reviewed the latest acquisition reports. The company's market value had tripled since Russell Maxwell's dramatic fall, each success a testament to the truth Alexander had known all along. Some betrayals, handled properly, can become opportunities. A knock at his door revealed Jonathan Griffith, now Lee International's chief legal officer, and his wife Kate. Their marriage 2 years ago had been a smaller celebration of another victory. The union of two people who had helped orchestrate one of Manhattan's most notorious downfalls. "Thought you'd want to see this," Jonathan said, placing a newspaper on Alexander's desk. The headline made him smile. Former executive Russell Maxwell denied early release. Kate noted, the judge wasn't impressed by his appeal for leniency. Alexander scanned the article. Russell's fall had been spectacular and complete. After the SEC investigation revealed the full scope of his financial crimes, he had accepted a plea deal resulting in minimum security prison, complete asset forfeiture, and a lifetime ban from serving as an officer in any publicly traded company. "Any word from Gloria?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Kate smiled with satisfaction. "Still hiding in Connecticut. Her sister finally kicked her out last year. Apparently, living off family charity gets old. She's working as a real estate agent now, trying to rebuild a life." Her social media was enlightening. She pulled up Gloria's LinkedIn profile on her tablet. The woman who once graced Manhattan's most exclusive charity galas was now advertising modest suburban homes, her designer wardrobe replaced by practical business suits. The prenuptial agreement Alexander had insisted upon had left her with exactly what she had brought to the marriage: nothing. She tried dating another executive last year, Jonathan added, until he Googled her name. Your story has become quite the cautionary tale in certain circles. Alexander's phone buzzed with a message from Marcy King, now his CFO, and trusted second in command. The latest quarterly numbers had exceeded projections again. She had proven invaluable in rebuilding the company's financial structure after Russell's schemes were untangled. "Speaking of success stories," he said, turning his laptop to show the stock ticker, "Stephanie's Educational Foundation just partnered with the Gates Foundation. The board's decision to maintain funding was one of our best investments." "Stephanie Hopkins," Kate added, dropped the Maxwell name immediately after the divorce, and transformed her personal humiliation into professional triumph. Her foundation now operates in 12 countries, its reputation enhanced rather than tainted by her ex-husband's disgrace. She remarried last year to a respected federal judge, and their wedding was featured in society pages. "Did you see Russell's latest appeal?" Jonathan asked, pulling out another document. "He's claiming mental distress, saying the shame and isolation have left him suicidal. Prison tends to have that effect," Alexander noted without sympathy. The document detailed Russell's current circumstances, his assets seized, his reputation destroyed, and his former colleagues treating his name like a contagion. Even after his release, the terms of his plea deal would prevent him from rebuilding any semblance of his former life. Gloria tried to visit him last year, Kate mentioned. He refused to see her, blaming her for everything. He said if she hadn't pushed him to spend so lavishly on their affair, he wouldn't have needed to misappropriate funds. Alexander smiled at the irony. They deserved each other. His intercom buzzed, a reminder from his assistant about the board meeting. 5 years after the scandal, Lee International bore little resemblance to the old company. Alexander had rebuilt it with people who shared his vision, his standards, and his understanding that loyalty and competence were inseparable. "One more thing," Jonathan said as they stood to leave. Gloria's lawyer reached out again. "She's written a memoir and wants to know if you'd consider dropping the NDA clause in the divorce settlement." "Not a chance," Alexander replied flatly. "She chose her story when she chose to betray our marriage. She doesn't get to profit from it now." After they left, Alexander walked to his window wall, observing the empire he had not just saved but exponentially expanded. The view reminded him of another evening 5 years ago, when he had watched his wife and business partner's worlds burn. Now he watched his company's lights shine brighter than ever, each floor representing another level of success, built on the ashes of betrayal. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Russell Maxwell's latest business venture, a small consulting firm attempted after his first year in prison through a proxy, had filed for bankruptcy. Even from behind bars, Russell had tried to rebuild, using contacts from his glory days. But Alexander's influence ran deep. One quiet word from him had sent potential clients running, he mused. A second message followed from a private investigator he still retained to monitor certain situations. Gloria's latest attempt at reinvention isn't going well. Her real estate career in Connecticut barely covers her rent for a one-bedroom apartment in an unfashionable neighborhood. The investigator's photos showed a woman aged beyond her years. The expensive treatments she once took for granted were now far beyond her means. She tried dating within her new social circle, but her past followed her like a shadow. A simple Google search, and the stories were everywhere. Manhattan's notorious affair had its own Wikipedia page, a cautionary tale of greed and consequence that made potential suitors vanish. A knock at his door revealed Marcy King, tablet in hand. "The Singapore expansion is exceeding projections. Ironic, considering it was Russell's disaster there that helped us expose everything. Sometimes failure is the foundation for greater success," Alexander mused, gesturing for her to sit. Their weekly strategy sessions had become a cornerstone of Lee International's growth. "Unlike Russell, you understand that true power comes from building, not taking," he said. "Have you heard about Stephanie's latest project?" Marcy asked, pulling up a presentation. Her foundation's educational initiative is revolutionizing access to STEM education in developing countries. "The Gates Foundation partnership is just the beginning," she explained. Alexander nodded, remembering how Stephanie had transformed during the scandal's aftermath. She had taken the remnants of her life with Russell and built something genuine. Her new husband, federal judge James Cornell, was the perfect partner in her renaissance. "The annual charity gala is next month," Marcy continued. "Stephanie hopes you'll attend. It's at the Metropolitan Museum again." "The same venue where everything began to fall apart," Alexander noted. The symmetry wasn't lost on him. 5 years ago, Russell and Gloria could barely look at each other there. Alexander's computer chimed with an email from Jonathan. Russell's appeal had been officially denied. The psychological evaluation found his claims of mental distress genuine, but not legally significant. The judge's comments were particularly cutting. Mr. Maxwell's distress appears to stem not from genuine remorse, but from the consequences of his own actions. "Did you see his daughter's wedding announcement?" Marcy asked quietly. Alexander had. Russell's only child, Lauren Maxwell, had married last month. The announcement mentioned only her mother, Stephanie, and her new stepmother. Russell's name was conspicuously absent, his prison sentence making attendance impossible. Even his contribution, what little he could still access, had been declined. "The foundation is her main focus now," Marcy added, working with her mother, trying to salvage something positive from her father's disgrace. A notification lit up Alexander's phone. An alert from building security that Gloria had tried to enter the lobby again, claiming she had important documents for him. Like her previous attempts, this one ended with security firmly, but politely, escorting her out. "Still trying," Marcy observed. "Still failing," Alexander corrected. "Some lessons take longer to learn." His calendar reminded him of dinner with Jonathan and Kate to celebrate their second anniversary. Their relationship, born from the ashes of betrayal, had flourished into something genuine. Kate's role in exposing Gloria's infidelity had earned her not only Jonathan's love, but also a position of trust within Lee International's expanding legal department. A book deal for Gloria's memoir had been rejected by a fourth publisher. Apparently, even with the NDA clause lifted, no one wanted to touch a story that made the author look unsympathetic. Alexander smiled slightly. Karma writes better endings than any publisher. The city lights began to twinkle as dusk fell. Each window in the surrounding towers reminded him how far he'd come from that rainy night when he first saw the PI's photos. His empire had grown, strengthened by the very crisis that should have weakened it. The next morning brought news that made even Alexander pause. Russell Maxwell had attempted suicide in his prison cell. He survived, but the incident report painted a picture of a man finally broken by the weight of his choices. He left a note. Jonathan reported during their emergency breakfast meeting at the corner cafe, the same booth where they had planned Russell's downfall years ago. Mostly rambling, but he mentioned that Gloria said she was the beautiful poison that destroyed everything he built. Alexander stirred his coffee, remembering the ambitious partner who had helped build Lee and Maxwell Enterprises, sending flowers to Stephanie and Lauren. They may have divorced him, but they shouldn't hear about this from the media. "It's already done," Jonathan said, pushing a folder across the table. "There's more," he added. Gloria's sister finally spoke to the press. Apparently, Gloria has been spiraling since losing her real estate license last month for forging documents to inflate her sales numbers. Alexander noted dryly, "Old habits die hard." She never understood that success requires more than just appearances. Their waitress Janet, still serving after all these years, brought their usual orders. "Saw your company's name in the papers again, Mr. Lee. Something about a new tech division." Alexander nodded with a rare smile. Lee International's latest venture into artificial intelligence has captured headlines and investor attention. The stock jumped significantly overnight. "The Singapore office will send their quarterly reports today," Jonathan mentioned after Janet left. "The project Russell nearly destroyed is now our most profitable division. Sometimes I wonder if he follows our success from his cell." He pulled up an email on his phone from the prison psychiatrist, who said Russell was obsessed with Lee International's stock ticker, watching it daily in the prison library. The morning light caught the silver in Alexander's hair, earned more from success than stress over the past 5 years. At 50, he had become what Russell only pretended to be, a true business titan, respected not for charm but for substance. His phone buzzed with a message from Marcy. "Look who's making headlines again," it read, with an attached link to a small Connecticut newspaper. Gloria Edwards, former Manhattan socialite, had been arrested for drunk driving after causing a scene at her ex-boyfriend's engagement party. The article mentioned her past, as it always did. She tried reaching out to Russell's daughter last week, Jonathan added. But Lauren blocked her number and reported her for harassment. Apparently, Gloria thought she could convince Lauren to support her memoir project. The real story of what happened. There's irony in that, Alexander mused. She finally wants to tell the truth, and nobody wants to hear it. Their conversation was interrupted by another message from Stephanie. The Foundation's new educational center will open next month. Will you do the honors at the ribbon cutting? The press would love the symmetry, Alexander replied. The man who saved the Foundation from her ex-husband's misconduct, helping launch its greatest achievement. Life has a way of sorting itself out, he observed as he typed his acceptance. Stephanie had built something real. Gloria and Russell had built illusions. Later that evening, in his office high above Manhattan, Alexander reviewed a personal document he rarely opened. His original plan, drafted the night he first saw the PI's photos of Gloria and Russell, outlined every step, the careful gathering of evidence, the strategic positioning of allies, the precise timing of each revelation. But the document's final page held something he had never shown anyone. A list of possible outcomes for all involved. He had predicted Russell's financial ruin, Gloria's social collapse, even the likelihood of attempted comebacks and reconciliations. What he hadn't predicted was how complete their destruction would be, how thoroughly their choices would compound the consequences he set in motion. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Lee?" His executive assistant asked. "Mrs. Cornell is here. Stephanie says it's important." Stephanie entered his office looking every bit the sophisticated philanthropist she had become. Marriage to Judge Cornell had erased the last traces of the uncertain woman she had been as Russell's wife. "I thought you should hear this from me first," she began, taking the seat. "Russell is being transferred to the prison psychiatric unit. The suicide attempt. It's worse than initially reported. The doctors say he's had a complete breakdown, talking about Wednesday nights and hotel rooms, about how he should have seen the signs." Alexander absorbed this silently, recalling another conversation in this office years ago. "I promised you that your foundation would survive Russell's downfall. Lauren asked me to tell you something else," Stephanie continued. "She's legally changing her name. She wants no connection to Russell Maxwell anymore. The foundation will be her legacy, not his shame." The city lights flickered to life outside his window as day faded into evening. Somewhere in Connecticut, Gloria was probably facing the consequences of her latest public meltdown. In a prison psychiatric ward, Russell Maxwell was finally confronting the true cost of his choices. And here, in the heart of the empire they tried to destroy, Alexander Lee sat with the woman who had risen from the same ashes. "We all make choices," he said finally. "Some choose to build, others to betray. The difference is in living with the consequences." Stephanie smiled, understanding in her eyes. "You never just wanted revenge, did you? You wanted justice." "I wanted them to understand exactly what they had thrown away," Alexander corrected. "The rest, they did to themselves." As night fell over Manhattan, Alexander Lee stood at his window, master of an empire built on the ruins of betrayal. Below, the city pulsed with life, each light a reminder that endings are just beginnings in disguise. He had lost a wife and a business partner, but gained something far more valuable. Proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying the old, but building something stronger in its place. His phone buzzed one final time. Jonathan confirming tomorrow's board meeting. Another quarter, another success, another step forward while others remain trapped in the consequences of their past. In the end, Alexander reflected, true power wasn't in the ability to take revenge, but in the strength to transform it into triumph. The city lights twinkled like stars, each one a testament to the empire he built from betrayal's ashes, while somewhere in the darkness, two people who once thought themselves clever enough to deceive him now faced the long, cold reality of their choices. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.